Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session today. My name is Tom Guskey, and I'm here today to talk to you about developing and evaluating effective professional learning. This session is actually prepared for ENNEA and the Department of Pedagogy at the Family of Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Zagreb in Croatia. I wanted to begin our session by sharing with you some contact information for me, so that if today's session prompts questions or concerns, there'll be ways that you can contact me. There are several ways you can do that. I do have a website that is just tguskey.com. If you go there, you can find additional articles about our topic today, other articles that are written in books that are on this topic. If you want to contact me by email, my email here at the University of Kentucky is just guskey@uky.edu. Those of you who follow X or Twitter are welcome to contact me through that as well. And there you have my phone number. Now, I also wanted to share with you a bit about from where I'm coming. I'm coming to you today from Lexington, Kentucky. Kentucky is located in the central part of the United States. Lexington, the city where I live, is very much centrally located in the state. Lexington is known really for two major things. First of all, we are the center of the horse industry in the United States. The entire city of Lexington is surrounded by horse farms, so it's a really beautiful place to live. And second, we are, of course, the center of the bourbon whiskey industry, too. I work at the University of Kentucky, which is located here in Lexington as well. For our session today, we have designed 4 different learning targets. First, we'd like to examine your personal experiences with professional learning and what you've considered to be effective within those experiences. We want to talk about the 5 levels of professional development evaluation and why each of those levels is important. I'd like to give you some information about what each level means and how each level builds on those that come before. And finally, we're going to talk about how when you plan professional development, the necessity of reversing the order of those 5 levels. So let's begin. One of the major problems we have in trying to develop or evaluate professional learning experiences was we don't agree on the criteria we use for judging effectiveness. Often in discussions like this, I begin by having individuals consider their own personal experiences with professional learning. And among those experiences, to identify what they consider to be the best and the absolute worst. With those experiences in mind, I then ask them to consider what was the topic of each, who planned it, who led it, and what were the results. After having done this, we compare everybody's responses. And what we find is there's amazing variation in the responses they give. In all 4 of these questions, they vary greatly in the topic or their content, how it was planned, how it was led, and what the results were. But the most important thing about this, and what I always stress, is that whether you realize it or not, by identifying the best and worst, you engage in the process of evaluation. You had to have some idea of what made one work and the other not work. When we think about evaluation in the context of professional learning, we can think about it in terms of these 5 levels. The first level, the one we do the best, the one in which we have the most experience, participants' reactions. We simply ask, did you like it? Was your time well spent? If we want to get a little bit more sophisticated, we can move on to level 2. Level 2 asks, what participants learned from that experience? And do you have evidence to show that as a result of this experience, that their knowledge base has changed or their skill level has been altered? If we have evidence at level 3 or level 2, we can move on to level 3. And level 3 actually turns away from individuals to the organization. Because what we've discovered is often we do things right from an individual training perspective, but then we send people back into organizations that are not set up to support them to do the things that we're asking them to do. Level 3 looks at that organization support and change. Did participants have the support that they needed in order to implement those ideas with some degree of fidelity? If the organization support is there, we can move on to level 4, which is their use of these new ideas. Do you have evidence to show that practice has really changed, that they implemented these new ideas or strategies? And finally, level 5, what was the impact on students? In our session today, I have 3 essential understandings that I hope you gain from our time together. Those 3 understandings are this. Number 1, each of these 5 levels is important. So I'd like to give you some information about each of the 5 levels so you'll be able to use them well to enhance your efforts to improve the effectiveness of professional learning. Second, each level builds on the previous levels. And what this means is that each level is important, but each level must be in place before you can move on to the next level. People have to have a positive reaction to the experience before they can learn anything. They have to learn some things before you can ask for change on the part of the organization. That change and support on the part of your organization has to be there before you can get high quality implementation. And you certainly must have high quality implementation before you can see an impact on students. Each level is important. Each level builds on those that come before. But finally, and perhaps most important, when you plan professional learning, the order is reversed. In order for efforts to reach level 5 and have an impact on student, we must reverse that order in the way we plan. The first thing to consider in planning any effective professional learning experience is the student learning outcomes you want to achieve. What improvements in student learning would you like to see? And what evidence would you trust to verify those improvements have been made? You take a step back from that and say, if these are the improvements we want, what strategies, what practices would we implement to gain those improvements? Is there evidence to support that those would work? Is that evidence really valid? Was it gathered in situations similar to ours? We stepped back from that and said, if these are going to be implemented, what is the support and the change on the part of the organization that individuals need in order to have high quality implementation? We take a step back from that and say, if that's to take place, then what is the knowledge and skills that participants have to have in order to gain that high quality implementation? And the last thing we consider, what professional learning experiences can we plan to ensure they attain that knowledge and skill? Now, these ideas are actually described in some detail in a book called Evaluating Professional Development. On my website, you can see information about this book available from Corwin Press. But the most important thing to keep in mind is that this gives us a very different perspective on regard to what professional learning really means. And in particular, the best professional learning is going to be purposeful, it's going to be evidence-based, it's going to be practice-oriented. Purposeful means we're setting out to accomplish specific goals with regard to our students. Evidence-based means we need to make sure the strategies really have evidence to support that these things will help us gain those improvements in student learning. And practice-oriented, it has to give us ideas that we'll be able to implement in our context with the students that we have in ways that are going to make sense to them. You see, what this says is we must begin with the end in mind. You must begin by thinking about the student learning outcomes you want to achieve and what evidence you would expect to see to show those improvements have been made. Always begin with this end in mind. What student learning goals do you want to achieve? What evidence best reflects the achievement of those goals? So with that in mind, how do we gather evidence on the effects of professional learning? And this is going to take us back to those 5 basic levels. The first level, reactions. The second, what they learn. The third, organization support and change. 4, implementation or use. And 5, its impact on student learning. What I'd like to do is very briefly take you through each of these 5 levels, and with each level, consider 3 questions. What are the questions you're going to address? What information are you going to gather at each of these levels? And how will that information be used? So let's start with level 1. Level 1 is participants' reactions. And so here, you're going to ask questions like, did they like it? Was their time well spent? Did the information make sense to them? Was it relevant to their context? Was the leader of the session knowledgeable and helpful? And what about the conditions under which they learned? Was the room the right temperature? Were the chairs comfortable? Was the refreshments fresh and tasty? Now, I know that a lot of people sort of make fun of that level of evaluation, but we're dealing with some very basic human needs here, and those need to be addressed. This is the very basic level where we start evaluation. And how we gather this information is typically through online questionnaires or surveys that are administered at the end of activities. And how's that information going to be used? Well, we're going to use to find out if we did provide a learning environment that was appropriate for what we hope people to gain from it. And if it wasn't, how can we do to improve it? The planning, the design, the delivery of it overall. And if they have a positive reaction to that experience, then we can move on to level 2. And level 2 asks, what did they learn from that experience? Did the participants gain the intended knowledge and skills? And keep in mind here, the key word is intended. Professional development is purposeful. And so we're moving in a direction where we have in mind precisely the knowledge and skills we'd like people to attain. And just as we would with looking at student evaluation, here we're going to adapt the way we gather this information to those particular learning goals. If there's knowledge involved, we might be able to get at that from an online questionnaire or survey, right? But if it's more of a skill, we might have to use a demonstration or some sort of performance assessment, a simulation, or actually ask participants the knowledge and skills they acquired from this. The bottom line here is we're trying to improve the content, format, and structure of the activity, just as you would do with any successful learning experience. If levels 1 and 2 are in place, we're ready to move on to level 3. And level 3 asks about organization, support, and change. As I mentioned before, often we do things right from a training perspective, but then send people back into organizations that are not set up to support them to do the things we're asking them to do. So level 3 turns to the organization and asks about, was the implementation actually advocated and supported and facilitated? Was support for implementation public and overt? How about problems? Were they addressed quickly and efficiently? Were sufficient resources made available? And that could be time, materials, technology. Successes, were they recognized and shared? Was there an impact on the organization itself? And did it affect the organization culture or procedures? Now, again, all these organizational things can be gathered in lots of different ways. Sometimes district or school records can be used. Minutes from follow-up meetings are always helpful. Questionnaires and surveys to participants, interviews with those participants, or even participant reflections can work out well. But here, what we're trying to do is document and improve the organization support, and especially so we can use that as a basis for improving future change efforts. If level 3 is in place, we can look to level 4, and level 4 talks about implementation. Did the participants effectively apply or implement those new ideas and skills? And we can gather this information in lots of different ways. Probably the most obvious is through direct observations, being able to go into classrooms and see if those new strategies or practices are being implemented well. Sometimes we can get it through interviews with participants or questionnaires. Focus groups with participants prove very helpful. And oftentimes we ask the participants to record this information through implementation logs. The bottom line here is we're trying to both document and improve implementation of the knowledge and skills. And if you do have evidence to indicate there was high quality implementation, we're ready to look at level 5, and that is its impact on students. How did these changes impact our students? Did it affect student performance or achievement? And how about students' attitudes or dispositions? Are they more confident as learners? What are the other benefits that might come from that success? Is student attendance or engagement improving or dropouts decreasing? Here we're talking about a wide variety of student outcome measures that could be achievement and cognitive, that could be affective and attitudinal, or even behavioral. There are lots of ways to get at this information, again, depending on the learning outcomes you're trying to achieve. Student data of all forms always works, but sometimes it's school or district data. Questionnaires and surveys can be very helpful. Interviews with the students, sometimes with parents or teachers, and even participant reflections on this overall. The bottom line is that we want to focus all aspects of the activities to provide the support for moving on to those improvements in student learning. And then finally demonstrate the ultimate impact of professional learning activities. So the 5 steps we're talking about here always begin with the student learning outcomes you want to achieve. Once you've decided that, then you move back and ask what research-based practices and strategies will achieve those goals. Once we decide that, then we turn and look at what organizations supported and changes necessary to gain that high quality implementation of those practices. What knowledge and skills must applicants and participants have in order to implement those skills with fidelity? And finally, what professional learning experiences can we plan to help them acquire the knowledge and skills? In the short time we have had, I have covered a lot of material, but I do hope it's been helpful to you. I hope it's given you some ideas you can discuss and see that it might be applicable to your experiences. And in particular, I hope it helps you think about professional learning in a new way, but in a way that really focuses on that ultimate impact you want to have on the improvements for students. If there are questions or concerns on which I can be helpful, I hope you won't hesitate to get in touch with me. And so finally, here again is my contact information. You may contact me through my website. You may contact me through email, through Twitter, if that's what you like. And there you have my phone number as well. I want to thank those who developed this session for this opportunity to share these ideas with you. I do hope it's been helpful. And I hope that you'll be able to use these in good ways to foster better learning on the part of your students. If we've accomplished that, then we've been very successful. Thank you, and have a great day.